So, Mr. Beer, I think this afternoon we've got 4 questioners, one on the longer side, one on the shorter side. So can we have a longer one and a shorter one, and then a break, and then a longer one and a shorter one, and conclude?
Yes, we can do that, sir. I think it's Mr. Maloney first.
Fine.
For 45 minutes, sir.
Mrs. van den Bogerd, I'd like to ask you about 2 topics, if I may. The first is the briefing of MPs on the 18th of June 2022, and in particular, the briefing in respect of Joe Hamilton, who sits here. And then the second topic I'd like to ask you about is the lepton issue, the Helen Rose report, or the Helen Rose investigations. So firstly, the briefing of MPs on the 18th of June of 2012. This meeting came about because of concerns expressed about the integrity of Horizon, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. That people were perhaps being wrongly convicted.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was meant to be an open and transparent engagement with MPs, wasn't it?
Yes.
Could we look at the briefing pack, the post office briefing pack for this meeting, which is POL 30-27722. And if we could please go to page 3 of that. Thank you. And we see there that, if we could just, thank you, Alice Perkins, who was the chair at that time, was due to say that we appreciate taking the time to meet us today. We take this issue very seriously. This impacts the lives of individuals, public money is at stake, and so is our reputation. And then importantly, we are open to feedback, and we will provide you the information we have available. We want to work with you to address all your concerns. And we'd rather be talking about the amazing things we're doing at the post office, but we need to address this concern, so today we'll just focus on this. Now, your role at this briefing, as Mr. Beer established yesterday, was to deal with the case studies. Yep.
Yes.
2 of them, and one of them was Joe Hamilton, who was James Arbuthnot's constituent.
That's correct.
And you were aware that he had formed the view that she wasn't guilty of any crime, and he had real concerns about it.
Can't remember exactly what we said because it was the first meeting.
Just general line, no need to expand. That's the general line of things, wasn't it? That he was concerned that she wasn't guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he sought through this meeting to have his concerns addressed, as was focused upon in the briefing pack by Miss Perkins. Now, he had to have the full picture in order to have his concerns addressed. All the information you have available, as Miss Perkins described it. And so presumably, with the responsibility of the case studies, you researched the Joe Hamilton case as fully as you possibly could.
At that time, I extracted the information from what had been done before.
Yeah.
So I didn't do a new investigation into the case. It was just what we had from the records is what I pulled together with the key facts.
Yeah. So
You're dropping your voice again.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And it helps, I think, to get quite close to the microphone. I think my voice would be very much dropped if I was away from the microphone as well.
Okay.
So you looked at the available documentation
That's
in
correct.
order to prepare your briefing, and so the investigation report, the prosecution file, and so on.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, what you had as perhaps the full picture, or the basis for the full picture, is set out at pages. It begins at page 13 of this same document. If we could turn that up, please. And this is example, you don't need to go through all of this page, but this is example case 1, and this is Josephine Hamilton begins working at the South Warnborough SPSO, so on. And we go down this page, and it shows us all the different incidents in terms of unidentified losses with Ms Hamilton on the 24th of February 2005, just for example, requesting hardship payments to be set up to clear the loss, and so on. If we could go on to the second page, please. We come on to the audit and investigation. We see Mrs Hamilton signed off on 7th of March 2006, and then we see on the 9th of March 2006 there's an audit undertaken with the deficiency of 36644.89 and the cash figure on horizon stated to be 373606, and the subpostmaster was precautionary suspended as a result of the shortfall, and she was requested to attend an interview under caution. We then see how that progressed, and so on the 5th of May 2006 we have the provision of the pre-prepared written statement, which sets out what Mrs Hamilton has to say about all of this. On the 11th of October 2006 the decision to prosecute, and the 30th of October 2006 the summons is issued. And then just over to the final page, please. We see that the defence offered pleas to false accounting by way of mitigation. There was a hearing before Winchester Crown Court, and the subpostmaster pleaded guilty to 14 separate counts of false accounting. This was accepted by Paul on the basis that the losses are repaid in full by 25th of January 2008, and the count of theft to remain on the file until the payment is made in full. And then we see the sentence, and then we see the payment of the outstanding matters. and so this was your aide-memoire for the summary that you were to provide to Mr Arbuthnot, as he then was Member of Parliament.
Yes.
Yeah. Can we just look at the investigation report of Mr Brander, which is POL 30/44389? And could we, thank you very much. Now, if we could go to the, so this is the investigation report, just to introduce it. Josephine Hamilton, when she started, and so on. We could go to the second page, please. And could we scroll down towards the bottom? Because it deals with the audit. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you very much. So Mr Stewart completed a full audit of the cash and stock and identified that deficit. And then at the bottom, Mr Stewart also identified an additional £61.77 shortage on horizon, which couldn't be accounted for. And thus the figure posted to late accounts was, and if you could just go to the next page, please, 36,664.89, this being the loss to Post Office Limited. Now, that was an extra shortfall that had developed overnight, wasn't it?
Sorry, I don't know.
The £61 odd.
Okay.
That was an extra shortfall that had developed overnight. And then if we could go to the bottom of this page. This is, that's it. We see there that Mr Brander says that having analysed the Horizon printouts and accounting documentation, I was unable to find any evidence of theft or that the cash figures had been deliberately inflated. And then if we could go to page 7, please. And down to the bottom of page 7, please. And we see in the penultimate paragraph, the only evidence appears to be the fact that the audit identified the money as missing, and concerns only came to light following a request to return excess cash. And instead of doing so, Mrs Hamilton was signed off as sick. None of those details were mentioned in your explanation of Mrs Hamilton's case to Mr Arbuthnot, MP, were they?
No.
He wanted to know all about this case. He wanted to be able to be reassured. And those things weren't in there, were they?
No. So it was a snapshot of what had gone. I don't know exactly what I reviewed, but that information isn't in what I presented.
No. And I took you just before to your description of what happened so far as the prosecution was concerned, and you said that the theft matter would lie on the file until a particular date.
Yes.
Yeah. But what actually happened was that Post Office Limited only agreed not to proceed with the theft charge on the basis that the outstanding shortage was paid by the time of sentence. If she hadn't paid by the time of sentence, then she would face a trial on theft. It was made clear to her that there must be some recognition that the defendant had the money short of theft, and that a plea on the basis that the loss was due to the computer not working properly will not be accepted. Now, those words are taken directly from the Court of Appeal Criminal Division judgment in Hamilton. So, but the additional fact that she had to accept the basis of plea, that the money, and there's also additional fact that she had to accept that, in her basis of plea, that she couldn't blame Horizon. None of that was in your summary either, was it?
So that wasn't in what I reviewed, I don't believe.
You didn't see that in the prosecution file?
No.
Right. I won't press that, but all of that detail, that there was no evidence of theft, that the audit showed that there'd been an additional shortfall overnight, that the only evidence was the shortfall, and then surely you must have seen that she was told that if she didn't pay on time, she'd have been proceeded against with theft. That was so important to that decent MP trying to find out what had happened to his constituent, wasn't it? That detail should have been included, shouldn't it?
So the detail that you've just gone through is not the detail that I had that was made available to me. So I've taken what I understood to be the key points out of the information that was provided to be able to provide that synopsis of what happened. But as I say, I didn't do an investigation at that point into the case. It was lifting information from what had already been pulled together.
You didn't need to do an investigation to include those details, Mrs. van den Bogerd. The fact that there was no evidence of theft, says Mr. Brander, and yet she was still charged with theft. Doesn't that have to go into your summary so that this MP actually knows what went on with his constituent's case?
So what I'm saying is I don't know if I'd actually seen that in the information that was made available to me at the time.
It was in the investigation report, Mrs. van den Bogerd. You said you read that.
So I read whatever files that we had available, and I don't remember exactly what files they were, but that's the information I pulled from there.
So when I asked you if you read the investigation report and you said yes, that might be wrong.
I don't remember in terms of what. So I was given some files and asked to pull a synopsis together for 2 cases. As I said, I didn't do any investigations at that point. It was on the basis that investigations had already been done, and I pulled the information, and I can't recall exactly what files I looked at.
Well, where might you have got your information then, just to test that? From what documents might you have got your information from?
Sorry, can we go back to the synopsis so I can just have a look at that, please?
No, please just answer that. You've said you're not sure about which whether or not you saw the investigation report. First of all, you said you had seen it. Then you said that you're not sure if you saw it. So I'd like to know what type of documents in the file that you received might have provided you with the information that you used in order to compile that summary for Mr. James Arbuthnot MP. So
from recollection, it would have been the audit, I presume, to get the information. There would have been some summary of what had happened, but without having actually the files, I can't remember exactly what I referred to. But what I did, I tried to lift the key points and put them into that synopsis so I could share that with the two MPs, and I did that for both cases.
Yeah. I'll cut to the chase. Did you not tell James Arbuthnot about the view of Mr. Brander and what happened at the audit? Because, to use a phrase we heard in a different context yesterday from Mr. Parsons, it distracted from what was otherwise a very clear picture, so far as you were concerned.
No, I didn't. I mean, when I was asked to pull it together, this was at the start of me getting involved in the investigations, and I just wanted to present the picture as I saw it from the information I had available.
Well, it comes to this, really, doesn't it? That the picture that you painted for Mr. Arbuthnot effectively summarises the points that supported the post office case, and then you went on to give information about sentence, etc. What you didn't do was to reveal that in the investigator's report, so one of the first documents to come into existence, these are my words, some doubt had been cast upon the charge of theft.
So I don't recall that I was aware of any doubt at that point, and had I been aware of it, I would have raised it at the time, but that's my recollection, and I can't remember exactly what documents I was presented with to pull that together.
Well, without wishing to repeat a Mr. Henryism, if you weren't provided with such a basic document as the investigator's report, doesn't that amount to negligence on someone's part?
I mean, I would have expected to have all the information provided to me at the time. And I don't even remember who gave me the information.
All right. Sorry for interrupting, Mr. Maloney.
Not at all. So I was just going to conclude this by saying, did you give the details that were designed to support your company? Was that what you gave?
Not knowingly. I mean, as I said, I just pulled the information from what I had available to put that case forward as an example of what happened.
Yeah.
I didn't knowingly do anything else other than that, present the facts as I saw them.
Second topic is lepton. Now, Mr. Beer has asked you about lepton this morning. And indeed, he asked you briefly about it yesterday, and you described having many conversations on the lepton issue.
Yes.
Yeah. Today, you said that you, and I'll just bring this up if I may. You were asked by Mr. Beer. So when Helen Rose was raising with Mr. Jenkins and then drawing to your attention the fact that basic ARQ logs are used for evidence in court, and therefore in some circumstances we would not be giving a true picture to the court, that didn't ring any alarm bells. And you said not for me at the time.
That's correct.
Yeah. Could we go back to POL 30977481? Thank you. And this email chain was sent to you. Could we please go down the page towards the bottom? We see there that Helen Rose has sent that to you on the 13th of February of 2013, Angela and Elaine. If we could keep going down to an email from Gareth Jenkins. Keep going, please. Keep going. If we could, please, thank you. And yes. And just one more, please. Right, now, this is an email from Mr. Jenkins to Helen Rose. And we see on this that at the bottom of that page, this is really the nub of it, isn't it? That when he says, however, what I was able to confirm from my look at the live data a couple of weeks ago, and is also held in the underlying raw logs, is confirmation that the reversal was generated by the system and not manually by the user.
Yes.
Yeah. And he was able to do that by looking at the raw data, the live data, and the underlying raw logs, which couldn't be ascertained from the ARQ logs. That's the nub of it, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, could we please just then go up to the email in response from Helen Rose? And she says, "Hi, Gareth. Thanks for the response. I can see where this transaction is and now understand the reason behind it. My main concern is that we use the basic ARQ logs for evidence in court. And if we don't know what extra reports to ask for, then in some circumstances, we would not be giving a true picture. I know you are aware of all the Horizon integrity issues, and I want to ensure that the ARQ logs are used and understood fully by our operational staff that have to work with this data both in interviews and in court." Now, what was it about those words that did not ring alarm bells for you, Mrs. van den Bogerd, about the use of ARQ data in court?
So I was looking at this from understanding what had happened in the Lepton case. Anything that Helen was raising in respect of what they did in the security team, I expected her to raise within her line, which I think is what she did do with this anyway. But that it didn't have alarm bells for me at that point, because I thought that was within Helen's space and she would do that with her direct line.
The alarm bells, whether it's her responsibility or your responsibility, surely the alarm bells ring and say, actually, what we're putting out there in court may not be accurate. Isn't that what she's saying to you? Isn't that, whether it's her responsibility, your responsibility, what does that matter? You're somebody very senior in Post Office who, if the email that Mr. Henry showed shortly before lunch is accurate, had at least some involvement in Horizon integrity issues. Does this not ring any alarm bells, Mrs. van den Bogerd?
As I said, it didn't.
Should it have done, Mrs. van den Bogerd?
Well, with what I know now, then I would look at this very, very differently. At the time, it just didn't ring any alarm bells with me.
Right, well, let's just go further up and see what else might not ring alarm bells. Penny Thomas says she responds saying, yes, Gareth, it is. That's about a change request. If we could just go a little bit further up. Oh, in fact, then that's when Mr. Jenkins has said that he understands Helen Rose's concerns, and I understand your concerns, and then change request. We just go a bit further up from there. And Helen Rose says, Angela Elaine, for information. Email string may be of interest. I'm not really sure where to take this. Happy to try for a change request if you would like me to, but at this moment in time, I don't want to tackle one small issue when we may need to challenge deeper issues with the way we see data from Fujitsu/Credence. No alarm bells for you there about deeper issues on the way we see data from Fujitsu/Credence when you were tasked with Horizon integrity issues, Mrs. van den Bogerd?
So at this time, I was tasked with getting under the skin of what happened in Lepton. As I've said, Helen was in the security line, and that was something that I expected her to do through her line. That wasn't for me to do, and therefore it didn't register with me.
Were you just willfully blind to this, Mrs. van den Bogerd?
No, I wasn't, and I wish that I had the insight now that I had now to read that very differently. But for me, it was about understanding what had happened in the Lepton case, and the change request would have triggered the ID being changed on the the system generated reversal, so that would be evident going forward.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so just in terms of this then, what you took from this, would it be fair to say, is that reversals could be performed by the system independent of the manual operator?
Yes, it was part of that transaction in terms of the recovery. Yes, it would, and it wouldn't have. Yes.
Well, yes, is the answer yes?
It was
It is,
system generated.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That standard ARQ data and credence data didn't show whether or not the reversal had been made by the operator or the system.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was only looking at the raw data that it was possible to see if the reversal had been made by the operator or the system.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I can take you to it if you need me to, but you told the Horizon Issues trial that you thought that the change request had not occurred. Yep.
I said I think it didn't. Hadn't taken. Yes.
Yeah. Now, can we please look at POL 20 140211? So I'll repeat that. POL 20 140211. And you were taken to this yesterday by Mr. Beer. It's the meeting with Panorama. And if we could go to page 22, please. And to the bottom of that page. Right.
I'm sorry, did we go to this yesterday? I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Well, it's here anyway.
Yes.
And you've seen it, haven't you?
I have seen it previously, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you talk about, and it's the final thing on the page. We do have a service level agreement, yes. We get a number of archive pulls from the system as part of that, and if we exceed that, then it's a cost. I think the important thing here is for all the cases in the scheme, we've actually pulled those archives, and I refer to we call it ARQ information, and we provide that, which beefs up the supporting evidence, and that is about every keystroke. It leaves the footprint of what happened over that period of time, and that would have been done in the court case.
Yes.
If we are, and I'm talking generically here, if we're bringing a case against someone in terms of prosecution, every piece of information, all the evidence that we were drawn to bring that case will be presented, and will be presented to the defence team as well. So that information, I don't know the ins and outs of the case anyway, but that information would have been provided by us, and it costs us. That's part of the cost of, there are legal costs involved, and there are other costs involved in bringing the case. So that information will not have been used if that was the case. And over to the next page, please. And Mr. Bardo says, and so for everybody on the mediation scheme, that ARQ data has been pulled, which means there is. So what kind of a picture do you have then of everything going on in the system for all of the cases in the mediation scheme complete? And Matt Bardo says every single keystroke, and you say absolutely. Why didn't you tell them about lepton at that point?
Sorry, what do you mean? Tell them about what?
Well, that the system could reverse it, and you wouldn't know from ARQ data whether or not the postmaster had done it. And so not every keystroke, not everything was able to be discerned from ARQ data.
We would have seen that it had been reversed, and the postmaster themselves would have known that it had been reversed. It just wouldn't have pointed to the auto reversal at that point, but he would have had, and he did have, disconnected receipts and reversal receipts printed in that case.
You wouldn't know. Look, the whole thing about lepton was somebody had paid their phone bill, and actually they hadn't. And you didn't know whether or not that reversal was made by the system or by the operator from the ARQ data. That's the reality of the lepton issue, isn't it?
In terms of the ID, yes, but the reversal had been done, and that's why the bill wasn't paid.
You then maintained that every keystroke was seen from the ARQ data, in the Horizon Issues trial, and Mr. Justice Fraser found against you on that, didn't he? And indeed, there was other evidence that said you were wrong about that.
I think it was around, I got confused with what Credence did, from memory, I think, as opposed to ARC information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well, you were wrong about ARC and Credence, weren't you? They just didn't record every keystroke.
so Credence didn't, and that's what from memory, that's what I was asked about, and I agreed with Patrick Green that it was Credence, and then corrected that later in the trial, that I'd been mistaken on Credence, and it was actually ARC that I was talking about.
You didn't give the full picture, again, about what you knew about lepton, did you, Mrs. van den Bogerd?
In the trial or for this? Sorry.
In Panorama and in the trial.
So in the trial, it was, I gave what I believed were the facts, and the facts were that the reversal had been generated by the system. And I think the question for me was whether the postmaster knew that it had been reversed, and he did, albeit later, because he did have the receipts. I think that was the point around there. And I understood from the Panorama that I was given the facts as I understood them to be when I gave that interview.
Yeah. Why didn't you mention lepton to Panorama?
Because we weren't talking about specific cases.
Were you not talking about the overall picture, about how basically you could support everything that happened?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Were you not talking about the overall picture, about basically you could support everything that happened because of the data that you had that covered everything off?
I was given a general picture of what we were able to do and had been doing, yes.
Why not tell them about lepton?
Because, as I said, we weren't talking about specific cases.
Did it distract from what was otherwise a very clear picture for you, Mrs. van den Bogerd?
What, the lepton case?
Lepton.
No, I mean, what it did is it highlighted that it wasn't obvious that the idea that the system had generated the reversal at the time. So I think that for me was important, that we understood that at the time, so that the postmaster knew what their ID was against and what it wasn't.
Thank you very much, Mrs. van den Bogerd.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. So who's taking the 10-minute slot first, Mr. Beer?
It's Ms. Watt on behalf of the Federation.
Right. I'll just move slightly so I can see her properly.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me through the system? So your microphone. It appears to be switched on.
Yeah, now
There
you
we
are, yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. van den Bogerd. I appear for the National Federation of Subpostmasters at this inquiry. I just wanted to look first at your career at the Post Office. You set out at paragraph 9 of your witness statement what that was, and some of it involved operational responsibility for post offices and interviewing and appointing sub-postmasters. Is that correct?
Sorry, yes. Can you tell me what year that was, so I understand the role?
So it would be fair to say that over the period 1996 to 2006, that you had direct experience of the sub-postmaster network, how it operated, and how sub-postmasters operated.
That's correct.
In particular, between 1996 and 2001, you were interviewing and appointing sub-postmasters. So it would be correct to say that this involved you in a direct assessment of the suitability of an individual to be appointed by the Post Office as a sub-postmaster.
That's correct.
And it would be important that those people were of good character, reliable, personable, honest, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And so you would likely agree with Sir Anthony Hooper of the working group when he said in evidence to the inquiry recently that I felt throughout the Post Office cases that it didn't make sense that reputable postmasters appointed by the Post Office after examination of their characters that they were stealing these sums of money. Would you agree with that assessment?
So I remember him saying that, yes.
Would you agree it didn't make sense that those otherwise honest and reliable postmasters were doing so?
No, I wouldn't agree entirely with that. And my reason for that is I had direct experience of reputable postmasters actually what I would call being a victim of circumstances and actually stealing from post office, and that would be prior to Horizon. So that was my personal experience. And as I said yesterday, my view was that postmasters did not come into the post office to steal money or defraud. However, unfortunately, on some situations that was true. It did happen.
The evidence here yesterday and today concerning your involvement shows that there were many, many occasions on which you were made aware of issues, including bugs, remote access, Gareth Jenkins, Ferndown Post Office, the case of Martin Griffiths, to name just a few. But you let prosecutions and financial recoveries carry on regardless, didn't you?
Prosecutions, when I became aware of some of those cases, prosecutions weren't happening very often then, but I wasn't involved in prosecutions. Recovery of monies did continue, and I'm not sure at what point. I mean, we did stop recovering when we were investigating some cases, I think, but in general it continued. The recovery of monies did continue, yes.
It might be said, Ms van den Bogerd, that your evidence here is an example of there are none so blind as those who will not see, as the biblical reference puts it. Those who have eyes and see not, those who have ears and hear not. You would not see, you would not hear, would you?
Not intentionally. I mean, I would never have done that intentionally, but I do accept that there are things that I have missed over that length of period, and things that I would look at differently now, knowing what I know now.
Well, the truth is, Ms van den Bogerd, that approach by you was just simply willful, wasn't it?
No.
Because the truth also is it not, as articulated by Lord Arbuthnot at the inquiry, they, the Post Office, were worried Second Sight was actually uncovering something really crucial about Horizon, and if they allowed it to carry on uncovering these things, it posed an existential threat to Horizon and in turn in the Post Office.
That's not the case.
And that is why you gave them much criticised evidence at the Common Issues trial before Mr Justice Fraser to protect the Post Office against that existential threat, isn't it?
So that wasn't my intention.
And that is why the truth is, over many years, Ms van den Bogerd, you were actually responsible for or complicit in ensuring that everyone who you and the Post Office needed to keep on side was lied to consistently, weren't you?
No.
That you were responsible for or complicit in the lie that there was nothing wrong with Horizon being fed on every possible occasion to MPs, government ministers, civil servants, the NFSP, unions such as the CWU, the courts, Second Sight, the working group, and media outlets such as the BBC, Channel 4, Computer Weekly, Nick Wallace, and anyone else who ever asked, weren't you?
No.
And the truth is, Ms van den Bogerd, isn't it, that it was absolutely necessary that all those people and organisations believed that lie in order to keep them on side. Nothing to see here, as Mr Beard put it, to avoid the existential crisis Lord Arbuthnot referred to, isn't it?
No.
Thank you. That's me, sir.
Thank you.
So, in fact, I think we can fit in Miss Oliver.
Miss Oliver as well, if she's prepared to jump
indicated
to her
that
feet.
she is.
I don't mean literally, I hasten to add. You can see each other properly, can you, with this?
We can broadly.
Just about, yes.
Ms van den Bogerd, I asked questions on behalf of Gareth Jenkins. I just want to pick up a point that Mr Beer and Mr Maloney have already asked you about, which means that I can happily be very quick in the question that I want to ask you. It concerns the lepton issue and the issue that was raised by Helen Rose with you in email correspondence that we've seen from 2013. If we can please go to that email correspondence, it's Pol 000 97480, please. Thank you. If we can go to page 5 of that string, please. Just to orientate ourselves, this is the conversation about whether the fact that a reversal of a transaction was system-generated or user-generated is clear in either the credence data or on the ARQ spreadsheets that could be extracted from the Horizon system. So here we have an email from Helen Rose to Gareth Jenkins on the 7th of February 2013. Hi Gareth, I have received the ARQ logs today and I can see clearly the recovery session. Can you tell me if this would always be available on all ARQ logs requested, or is it something you requested specially for me after being aware of the issue at this office? And if we can then scroll up, please, to page 3. Gareth says that he is going to look at the logs from Penny Thomas. He provides some explanation that you've already been taken to. If we can then please go up a little bit further. Thank you, just pausing there. This is the email that you've looked at earlier this afternoon, where she thanks him for his response and expresses the concern that the ARQ logs used in evidence may not contain this information. Do you agree that that's the concern being expressed here?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And then just the final paragraph of this email. My feelings at the moment are not questioning what Horizon does, as I fully believe that it is working as it should. It is just that I don't think that some of the system-based correction and adjustment transactions are clear to us either on either credence or ARQ logs. And then if we can please go up to Mr. Jenkins' response just above this. Thank you. Thank you. He responds to that email. Helen, I understand your concerns. It would be relatively simple to add an extra column into the existing ARQ report spreadsheet. That would make it clear whether the reversal basket was generated by recovery or not. I think this would address your concern. I'm not sure what the formal process is for changing the report layout. Penny, that's Penny Thomas, can you advise as to the process? Is this done through a CR? And do you understand CR to mean change requests?
Yes, I do.
And we don't need to go to it, but Penny Thomas confirms that that is the process. So is it right that what we're seeing here is Mr. Jenkins telling Helen Rose, and then that information being relayed to you, that there is a process by which the ARQ spreadsheet could be amended, and that that process is relatively simple?
Yes.
And is your evidence that notwithstanding the availability of that process and its relative simplicity, that that process was never undertaken?
I don't know whether it was. When I was asked in court by Justice Fraser, I said I didn't know. I didn't think it had been implemented. I have, through this disclosure process, seen something, and I can't recall exactly what, where that was listed as an improvement, but I don't know whether it's actually ever been implemented or not.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Right, well, we'll have our afternoon break now. What's the time now?
It's 1:45, sir. So
Right, so we'll begin again at 5 to 3, and Mr. Steen will draw us to a conclusion by 20 to 4. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, thank you. Good afternoon, Mrs. van der Bogerd. My name is Sam Steen. I represent a large number of sub-postmasters, mistresses and employed people working within branches. Sub-postmasters, mistresses were repeatedly told when contacting the helpline that they had to make good for shortfalls. They were told that despite the fact the sub-postmasters and mistresses were saying, we don't know what's wrong, it's not our fault, we didn't do this, this isn't down to me. Who told the helpline staff that that's what they must say to sub-postmasters?
That would have come through their knowledge.
Could you keep your voice nice and loud,
Sorry.
please? It's towards the end of the afternoon. I think in the High Court trial you were asked by the learned judge there to keep your voice up at the end of the day. So let's try that, please.
Okay, so it would be wherever that would be in their knowledge base, so that would be what they would have in terms of advice to be given. They also would have in there, if postmaster needed assistance, they could refer that as well. So it depended on what the detail of that conversation would have been.
In the knowledge base, put that into language that we understand. What do you mean by the knowledge base?
So knowledge base is a library of information from which they draw on in relation to particular queries. So
Right.
it would be the source information that they would need to use.
Would these be the scripts that they would use in order to answer questions being raised at the helpline?
So some people refer to them as scripts. That's not what they're intended to be, but it is where the knowledge source is.
Right. Other terms we've heard, or a similar term to the one you're using, is knowledge article.
That would be the same thing.
Okay,
yes.
all right. Now, sub-postmasters were also told by the helpline that they were the only one. In other words, that they were the only sub-postmaster or mistress that was saying there's a problem with the system. Would that also be in the knowledge base?
No. I've heard that over the years being made, but I've never seen that anywhere.
Well, of 102 core participants represented by Howe & Co., 43% of those core participants have been told that by the helpline that they've just got to pay up, it's your shortfall, you owe us the money. And 48% were told that you are the only one. That's very high numbers of people contacting the helpline, being told you've got to pay up for a shortfall, it's down to you. And secondly, you're the only one saying there's a problem within the system. It's a lot of people, isn't it? High percentage, isn't it, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
Of the numbers you just quoted, yes.
Now, what's going on here is fraud, isn't it? The post office is saying to people that who are saying to them there's a problem, there's a shortfall, trying to get help from the helpline. They are being told by the helpline, pay up. It doesn't matter that you're saying it's someone else's fault. That's fraud, isn't it?
So as I said, it depends on what the detail of that conversation would be. And depending on that, it might be that the helpline had asked for somebody to go out and visit them and help them. But I don't know in terms of specific cases that you're talking about.
What do you mean depends, Mrs. van der Bogerd? Sometimes it's fraud and sometimes it isn't. Is that what you're trying to say, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
I'm not saying it's fraud at all.
All right. Well, let's test what you appear to be saying. The evidence that you've given in answers to Mr. Beer yesterday was that it was understood within the post office that shortfalls were down to the sub-postmaster or mistress, that they had to pay. Let's see if we can test that. So you get a sub-postmaster or mistress in a small local branch office with a shortfall of 50 grand, £50,000. And there's no proof, absolutely no proof, that they're responsible for that £50,000 shortfall. Yet they're being blamed by the post office and told, you've got to pay up nevertheless. Is that fair in any way, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
I would expect to be able to investigate that to see if we could get to the bottom of what happened to that money. But over the years, that facility wasn't there.
Right. Let's just talk about it right now. Do you regard that situation where sub-postmasters and mistresses were being told to pay up for very large sums of money, something of the order of 50,000, it could be tens of thousands, or it could be more? Do you, sitting there today, regard that as being fair?
No, I haven't worked in the post office for over 4 years. My expectation would be that they would get some help to see if they could understand where that shortage had come from.
Now, this entire area, which is people being told to pay up for shortfalls regardless of fault, you said in your evidence yesterday that this had been checked with legal. It had been approved with people at legal. Now, you seem to be explaining that that was something that you were aware of in 2011, about the time of the Shoesmith case. And you went on to say yesterday, in relation to who it might be at legal, you named these names: Mandy Talbot, Rebecca Mantle, and probably Rob Wilson. So let's try and understand a bit more about what you're saying about this. Are you saying in 2011, the legal team people told you that it's okay, you can blame postmasters for anything, because they have to pay? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
No.
Right. So what was the advice from the legals?
So what I'm saying is that the policy approach was approved by the legal team, which was that postmasters were liable under the terms of their contract for errors due to their negligence. And I forget, it's been quite some time now, but it was set out in the contract. Any dispute around whether a contract should be terminated on the basis of that or not would be done with the policy advice from legal team. That's how the policy was set out. And not just in 2011, that's my understanding of how things operated over the years.
Right. Well, the term of the contract that you referred to yesterday was this, that the subpostmaster is responsible for all losses caused through his own negligence, carelessness, or error.
Yes.
Okay? Right. So it helped you with the wording. Well, that wasn't what was happening at the post office, was it? You know that subpostmasters were being told to pay up irrespective of fault. You know that, don't you, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
So it would have been in line with the contract. That was my expectation. Helpline were telling that they were liable for losses, but that would have been, at that point, referred to their contracts advisor if that needed a further conversation.
Now, in your statement, you say this, that in relation to your time at the post office, that from January 2015 to December 2016, this is your statement, paragraph 9K at page 6. You were responsible for the NBSC, the Postmaster Helpline, as you were the director of Pol's Support Services.
That's
okay?
correct.
All right. Now, I've asked you a number of questions about knowledge articles. You've helped us by calling them, referring to a knowledge base. Where are those knowledge articles, these scripts, saved? Where are they, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
Within MBSC?
Right. And are they saved on a particular system?
I don't know.
Well, you were in charge of the helpline, so I'm hoping that you do know something about this.
So I don't know what system they were stored on. They are stored, and that would have changed. It would have been with Royal Mail up until 2012, and then it transferred into Post Office, but I don't know what system they're stored on.
Now, on the 25th of May 2010, Jennifer O'Dowd, who had been a sub-postmistress at Great Staunton, Cambridgeshire, since November of 2000, was interviewed by Jonathan Longman. Now, Mrs. O'Dowd is watching these proceedings from her bed. She's watching it on a tablet because she is suffering from gastroenteritis. So she is very much paying attention to these proceedings. Now, in the discussions that she had in her interview with Mr. Longman, the investigator, she made it very clear that she had been ringing up the helpline, asking for help. She wanted somebody to come out and see, or somebody to start taking action. And she was told, only by the helpline, that she'd got to make it good. In other words, she'd got to make the shortfall good. Now, do you understand what I've just said? That's
Yes.
what Mrs. O'Dowd was going through. Do you think she wasn't telling the truth about that?
No?
Right. Can we have up on the screen, please, the document which is POL 00143567. Now, that's the interview with Mrs. O'Dell, Miss Longman, where she sets that out. And she sets out in that interview repeatedly what's going on. I'm now going to take you to the investigation report, which is POL 00189-165. So POL 00189-165. Could you go to page 3 of that document, please? And you'll see there at the bottom part on the screen it says, and I'll paraphrase, in relation to the 4th of August 2009, Mrs. Adele said that she had contacted the Post Office helpline and reported she had ongoing discrepancies and wanted assistance. Okay? And further down the page to the second half of page 3, please. Okay. Now, you'll see there, I think it's the 4th paragraph down from the top, Mrs. O'Dell continued to make further calls to the helpline with regards to the shortage, and they are recorded as follows, all right? And it says this, 23rd of October 2009, could someone ring PM as she needs to discuss the PIN pad with them as she's been having a few problems with this and thinks it's causing the office a discrepancy. Needs to discuss this in private. 4th of November 2009, office has a loss of 7,000. She's been carrying this since May, refused to make it good, as she said it's not her loss. Emailed NSA, but PM wants a call back from Tier 2. 5th of November. Spoke to Mrs. O'Dell today. Office has a loss of 7,000. She's been carrying this loss since May. Explained to PM that this loss should have been made good when she's been rolling her TP, but she refuses to make it good, as she said the loss is not her. And 5th of November 2009. Subpostmaster reports having a £1,000 loss a month since May, now totalling 7,000. She refuses to make good as she blames the system for the losses. She has done many checks and cannot find anything and not had corrections. Subpostmaster insisting on escalating. Now, how many people roughly were employed at the helpline?
In 2009, probably, I guess, about 50.
Yeah. So Mrs. O'Dell has phoned up and probably spoken to different helpline people at the time. She'd been lucky to have spoken to the same person twice. Okay? And this is an investigation report written by Jonathan Longman, the investigator, setting out what he has found as regards what she has been told by the helpline. Okay?
Yes.
Right. Now, do you see anything wrong with what the helpline is repeatedly telling Mrs. O'Dell?
Yes, and it should have been escalated.
Right. Instead, what was happening was that she was being told basically to shut up, pay the money. That's roughly what was being said, wasn't it?
She was being told it was her liability to make it good.
Say it a bit louder, would you please,
Sorry,
Mrs. van der Bogerd?
she was being told it was her liability and she should be making it good, yes.
But that's wrong, isn't it, as against the contract?
Yes. Well, what I would have expected here is, even at the first call, she should have had a call back. It should have been escalated to, and I think it was still in place then, the Tier 2. So they had your basic helpline, and then they should have escalated to Tier 2. Every time she's called in, they should have been able to see what had been said to her previously, and it should have been escalated.
Now, you were part of the, you were present at the High Court action. You were there, I think, on virtually every day of the High Court action. That's what people recall.
Yep.
You were there on every day of the action with an iPad that had been given to you by the Pole legal team. You were there and observed, watching and taking part in the proceedings very closely. Is that fair?
When you say the iPad, you mean to be able to watch the screen?
And what was going on with it? Yes. And you recall that there was other evidence being given in the High Court about people that were sent letters saying basically the same as the helpline. In other words, pay up for the shortfall. You recall that, don't you?
Not specifically.
Now, when you think about it, Mrs. van der Bogerd, what we've got here is a helpline that is being pushed by the scripts to tell the people in the branch offices that they need to pay out for shortfalls. That's been orchestrated by the Post Office, isn't it?
It would have been part of the scripts to say that the postmaster was liable for the losses. Yes, it would have been.
See, Mrs. O'Dell's lived in Great Staunton for over 50 years. What happened to her was that people would cross the road and avoid her once publicity got out from the post office in relation to her. Suffers post-traumatic stress disorder. She can't sleep. She has night terrors. That's what's happened. Now, you refer to her in your statement, don't you?
I do, yes.
And you know that she says, and has said in her human impact statement, that when you engaged with her on one occasion, she says that you were intimidating and bullying towards her, telling her that she had stolen the money. And if she didn't, the post office would take her home away. Now, you say in your statement that you didn't behave that way.
Yes, that's true, I didn't.
Let's think about this, Mrs. van der Bogerd. You were post office through and through, like a bad stick of rock with pole in the middle of it. Weren't you, Mrs. van der Bogerd? You carried the post office line. The post office line was that subpostmasters and subpostmasters had to pay up for shortfalls. That's what you were saying to her. That's why she felt intimidated. Isn't that true, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
No, I never said that to Mrs. O'Dell. I met Mrs. O'Dell on 2 occasions. One in London, I think it was Portcullis House, with her MP in the room and myself and a few other people. That conversation did not take place then. And the second time I met Mrs. O'Dell was in the mediation scheme when I was mediating her case. And again, there were 5 of us in the room, including her legal representative from Howe & Co. And that conversation did not happen. And what I'm saying is I believe she's mistaken. If she did have that conversation, it wasn't with me.
Well, let's give this a little bit more thought. Mr. Justice Fraser, now Lord Justice Fraser, stated, as regards you, and I'll read out the quote that relates to you, unless I state to the contrary, I would only accept the evidence of Mrs. van den Bogerd and Mr. Beale in controversial areas of fact in issue in this common issue trial if these are clearly and uncontrovertibly corroborated by contemporaneous documents. Now, that's a High Court judge version of saying that if you told him it's a sunny day, he'd go outside and check for himself. Now, does that help us understand that where there's a clash of evidence between you, Mrs. van der Bogerd, and Mrs. O'Dell as to what's happened, we might just think that Mrs. O'Dell should be believed?
You might do, but it's not true. I know that didn't happen. And there were other people in the room on both of those occasions. And had anything like that happened, they would have raised it at the time.
Now, what was said about you by Mr. Justice Fraser was pretty serious, isn't it? It's condemning you absolutely out of hand as being someone that simply he can't trust. And he's someone that's evaluated your evidence over quite some time in the witness box. It's a pretty serious thing to hear about yourself, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. OK. And the post office obviously was aware of what was being said about you, yes?
Yes.
Yes, OK, fine. What did the post office do by way of an investigation into this? They must have looked into this, did they?
No.
No? There was no discussion with you about, well, hang on, that High Court judge, said some pretty rum things about you. Surely we should take this seriously. Nothing like that. Nothing ever done.
No.
No? I see. All right. Did you get your bonus that year in 2019, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
Yes.
I see. So despite a finding in the High Court that basically you lied to the High Court, you got your bonus?
Yes.
Now, how were the people on the helpline trained so that they were so consistently pressing the sub-postmasters for payments? How was that done? How did you manage and others manage to persuade them that you've really got to do this? What did you have, away days, training sessions, evening sessions, things like that?
No, they had their training when they came into the role and they had ongoing training throughout.
What do you think was going on domestically with the sub-postmasters and mistresses in their situation? Do you think that when they're being told to find large sums of money like that, that they rested well?
Clearly not.
No. And you understand from the evidence being given in these proceedings that sub-postmasters and mistresses would try and find money to pay. They would sometimes borrow from family, from friends, loan sharks. even memorably on one occasion taking money, probably on more than one occasion, taking money from the kids' piggy bank. That's what was going on, Mrs. van der Bogerd. You've not taken responsibility for very much, if anything at all, in this inquiry. Do you want to take any responsibility for being part of the Post Office actions in doing so?
I've explained what my roles were. I've said that there are some documents that I've missed and I wish I hadn't. And I would have looked at things differently knowing what I know now.
Let's have another look, though. Let's have another think about what this did within the Post Office and what it did to the Post Office's investigation of difficulties with the Horizon system. So, we can see that the helpline was part of the Post Office's pay-up principle, the penalty pay-up principle. You've got to pay. We're not accepting criticisms of our wonderful Horizon system, OK? What do you think that would have done to the reporting of faults in relation to the Horizon system? Do you think it would have been a good idea or a bad idea?
Sorry, I don't
Right.
understand what you
If
mean.
people are being told to pay up when they're trying to say there's something wrong with your system, does that help identify faults in the Horizon system?
No.
No, it
As I
doesn't.
said, I would have expected them to have been escalated, for them to be offered some help in finding the losses.
But that was what was going on, Mrs. van der Bogerd.
Well, it was it was in some cases. There's evidence of people did get help and did get assistance in branch. What I'm saying is what should have happened in the case of Mrs. O'Dell is that it should have been escalated and she should have got some assistance.
Mrs. van der Bogerd, you do listen to things occasionally, don't you? I've explained already that of 102 people, over 40% of people that were using the helpline were told, pay up. Don't worry about what you're saying about the system. Now, we can't replicate everybody working in the Post Office over these many years. But there's likely to have been a very significant number of people who are told to basically pay up. We're not listening to you complaining about the faults. That would not have helped the investigation of issues with the Horizon system. Do you agree?
I agree.
Because it means that when passing on problems that were being experienced by subpostmasters, those problems weren't getting to Fujitsu, were they, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
I agree. And postmasters telling us they were having problems and us being able to investigate them or pass them to Fujitsu would have really helped. Unfortunately, in many cases, we weren't being made aware that there were problems and they were covering losses in a number of cases, and that didn't help us either. So,
right, you can have your nice falling out with Fujitsu as much as you like, Mrs. van der Bogerd. Let's try and think about where the governance lay in relation to the helpline system. Who should have been in charge of the helpline system, stopping this misinterpretation of the contract, stopping the fraudulent line being taken by the Post Office that they had to pay up? Who should have been the title of the person in charge of that part of the system?
So the knowledge base information came from the relevant product or function owners. So MBSC would pull the information from the relevant section. It wouldn't be compiled by MBSC, it would be compiled by other people around the organisation. So in terms of that particular question, it should have been through contracts and or legal in terms of was that information that they had on the knowledge base correct in terms of what they're giving to postmasters?
Right. Let's help in a slightly different way. Should it have been the chief operating officer that was in charge of making sure that there was oversight of what the product was, in other words, what was being said within the helpline? Should it have been the CEO? Should it have been a particular director? Who should it have been within management that was governing that aspect?
It should have been whoever the executive director was at the time, and the structure changed several times. So it would have been the chief operating officer at some point. It would have been the CFO at some point. So it changed over the years. And I don't know who it would have been in 2009.
Now, over the period of many years that the Post Office was operating the Horizon system, there came a point in the early noughties where what was going on was that the Post Office was having to target the closure of branch offices. Do you agree?
There were several programmes of closure, yes.
Yes, right. Now, were there for the area branch managers, at one time you were one of those, were there targets in relation to branch closures? In other words, it would be very helpful if you could achieve 20, 30, 40, 100 closures.
Not at a local level, no.
No, not at the local level. What about the more senior level? Were there targets?
So as part of, there were 3 programmes that I remember, network change, network reinvention and network transformation. They were all targeted at reducing branches, but they were run as programmes with compensation.
Well, there was compensation for branches that were closed by agreement. So the
Yes.
compensation might be a year or two's pay over, or a particular period. You agree?
I agree.
Now, if a branch was closed as a result of an audit, so someone not being able to pay a shortfall and therefore targeted for a civil action or worse, prosecuted, they didn't have to pay the sub-postmaster or mistress, did they?
No.
No. And if a branch was closed in a small local community area and it was closed because a sub-postmaster or mistress was being blamed by the post office, then that's helpful to the post office, isn't it? Because local people then can't complain it's the post office fault because it's the sub-postmaster.
That wouldn't have been helpful because we would have looked to re-establish that provision in the area at that point. We had certain access criteria that we had to comply with from government.
And if the branch was closed because of an audit and because people can't pay the shortfall that they've been told that they must pay or they're prosecuted, the post office can try and recover, as they did on many occasions, money through the civil courts or the criminal courts. So in that case, they get a branch closed without having to pay compensation, and they get money back from the shortfall that wasn't the sub-postmaster's fault. True, isn't it? That was what was going on.
No.
Did you get a bonus at a certain level for achieving your targets in relation to branch closures?
When I was part of the network change programme, I would have had an objective linked to that, but it was part of the programme. Other than that, my targets would have been related to maintaining the size of the network or increasing it, because that was some of the roles that I was in previously. So quite the opposite of what you just described.
Well, it doesn't sound like it's the opposite. As part of the bonus structure, in achieving the end result, which is closure of branches, there was some link to bonus. Do you agree?
Only as part of a programme. My other roles, when I was part of the rural network, was to maintain the size, and if we had a closure, then to re-establish a service in that area.
Now, you say at paragraph 30 of your statement, I'm going to take you to it, please. So statement WITN 099000100, paragraph 30, page 14, please. If you can just scroll down to, thank you. Prior to this, you say, I was aware of general rumblings of complaints and concerns about the integrity of the Horizon system. Okay?
Yes.
And I believe that when I took over the responsibility for the contracted administration team, I became aware of claims that the Horizon system itself was generating the discrepancies in branches. All right? Now, in your statement at page 6, paragraph 9K, I'd rather have this on the screen, please. I'll read out the relevant part I'm about to refer to. It says this, that between 2015 and 2016, you were Director of Support Services, and then you were also managing the contract advisors and contract administration teams. Now, just help us please understand what you're saying about when it was you became aware of the rumblings and complaints and concerns about the integrity of the Horizon system. It doesn't seem to have been 2015 when you were managing the contract advisors and contract administration team.
So I managed them in 2011 as well. So the contracts, I managed them in different times. So I took on responsibility for Lynn Norbury and John Breeden, who headed up the team in 2011. I then, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to refer to my statement in terms of the roles that I did, because I stepped out.
Page 5, you might find useful.
Thank you.
if you're referring to the period of time which is December 2010 to August 2012.
So
Head of
that
Network
was,
Services.
that was when I was head of
Right.
network services.
So which year, during the different roles that you had within the Post Office that you set out within your statement, are you saying you were aware of these rumblings?
So that was so what I'm saying is in 2011, when I took on the contract advisors team as part of my role then, that's when I started to get involved in these cases, and that's when I was aware of Shoesmith. Prior to that, I had been aware of some rumblings, and then I got involved in 2011.
Well, if I can interject, unless my memory is failing me, I think Mr. Beer showed you a document yesterday which gave you, which put you on notice in 2004.
So that was the Lower Eccleston case.
Yeah, and you accepted, I think, that was at least a rumbling.
So that was the provision of Horizon logs to the postmaster at the time, yes.
Right. So by the time you get to what seems to be around 2010, you've got background rumblings, you've got the build-up of what's going on, you've got the JFSA being formed, you've got the incredibly brave Computer Weekly publicising problems and complaints with the Horizon system, you've got MPs talking about it, sending in letters to the managing director and CEOs of the company. Now, there's a lot of rumblings going on here in relation to the integral part of the Post Office system that's called Horizon. This is a lot of rumblings. Do you not agree?
At around that time when I stepped into that role, yes.
Yes. Now, this has got to be very worrying amongst people working at the Post Office, that this thing Horizon, which we all depend upon, everybody seems to be saying that there's a real problem with it. Do you not agree? These rumblings must have been pretty worrying for people at the Post Office.
So what I'm saying here in terms of the rumblings, that was my recollection. And it's only when I stepped into taking on the responsibility for the contracts advisors team that I started to be exposed to that. What you've just described is when I started to be exposed to that. And then leading on from that, that's why I wanted to get involved in the initial investigations into the cases and then the scheme.
Well, Mrs. van der Bogerd, what we haven't seen at around that time, or indeed, frankly, any time, is any documents which say something along the lines of, gosh, maybe there's a problem with the Horizon system. Imagine the harm that we might be doing. Imagine what we're doing to families, the mental health of our sub-postmasters and mistresses, the people working those branches. We don't see anything like that, Mrs. van der Bogerd, in relation to these rumblings that you're talking about going on at that time. Is that because the culture of the Post Office was all about the Post Office brand and damn the sub-postmasters?
No.
What other explanation is there, Mrs. van der Bogerd, when we see a total absence of care about people with families that you should be trying to protect, not prosecute?
That's why we brought in Second Sight, and that's why we wanted to investigate the cases, because at that point, it was evident that there were a number of people that were claiming that the Horizon system was causing their losses.
Let's go back to the helpline. Did the message change once these rumblings were getting louder and louder and the crisis was getting ever more obvious and ever more serious? Did the line from the helpline change? Did you make sure that the helpline, or anyone make sure that the helpline still wasn't saying to these poor people in the Post Office branches that they've got to pay up regardless? Did anybody give that any attention, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
I did, yes. As part of the branch support programme, I brought in those changes. So on the back of Second Sight's interim report, I set up the branch support programme, which was about making improvements to a range of processes and working with subpostmasters, and one of those was MBSC.
Right. So that means you must have done a bit of checking about what was going on at the MBSC to make this make sense. You must have gone to them and said, let's have a look at what you've been doing so far. Did you do that, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
So what I looked at was providing the support in MBSC. That meant that there was more tier 2 support to be able to deal with the escalations that you took me to in Mrs. Odell's case, for instance, so that we had better support there.
So at around that time, are you trying to tell us that you saw that there were problems within the NBSC, that there was people being told to pay up regardless, and you then made a correction. Is that what you're trying to tell us?
I'm saying it was a broader improvement. So the interim report...
Could you cut the corporate speak?
So
could you just tell us whether you tried to improve the problem, which I've discussed with you?
that was part of it, yes, I did. I
So you must have recognised that there was a problem in the operation of the helpline at that time. Is that correct, Mrs. Van der
So I
Merwe?
recognised that postmasters weren't getting, I'm not saying all cases, but in some cases, they weren't getting the level of support that they should have had in relation to investigating their discrepancies. And that's what I set to correct through the branch support programme. And then later, when I took on responsibility for MBSC, I continued with those improvements.
Okay. Now, what about a message being sent out to the postmasters and mistresses? Was there a message sent out at that time to say, look, we're beginning to think that there might be a bit of a problem, that there could be a difficulty with shortfalls, and you need to be on notice? Did anybody provide them with a warning to say, look, there's a bit of an issue here?
No.
No. Jacqueline Falcon worked as a counter clerk at a post office branch in Hadston, Northumberland, between 2000 and 2015. She got blamed by her employer for a shortfall. This policy was so embedded within the system that subpostmasters and mistresses would blame other people for losses. Mrs. Falcon was arrested and charged with fraud. She was handed a 3-month prison sentence, suspended for 3 months. Shunned by the local community, barely able to leave her house. It's affected her pregnancy. She was put on antidepressants during that time. And to this day, she still does not go into the Hadston post office branch. Now, that was happening to her in 2014. And in February 2015, that was when she was arrested. Why didn't the post office send out a message to make sure that people were not being unnecessarily blamed for what might be, what could be, a problem within the system? No proof of it at that point in your mind, it seems, but what could be a problem? Why wasn't that message sent out?
So the message we always gave then was, if you have an issue, please ring and we will help with you, with getting to the bottom of it. That's what I put in place as part of the branch support programme and when I was in support services. Earlier than that, then that level of assistance wasn't available.
Ms. Van der Bogerd, in the High Court, and regarding the High Court action, Mr. Bates and other witnesses have stated that the Post Office was clearly trying to outspend and outdistance the Globe claimants. Was that the Post Office strategy?
That was my understanding of it.
3 leading counsel were instructed over various times. Why so many?
Sorry, in the
3 leading counsel, 3 QCs at that time were instructed.
So I was aware of 2.
Mr. Justice Fraser said this, paragraph 58 of his judgment in relation to the Horizon Issues, judgment number 6. Over the numerous hearings and 2 full substantive trials I have conducted, I have gained the distinct impression that the Post Office is less committed to speedy resolution of the entire group action than are the complainants. Was that a deliberate strategy being employed by the Post Office to try and outspend the Glow claimants?
Not that I was aware of.
Mr. Justice Fraser said from his considerable experience that in relation to serious and difficult High Court actions, even as against other cases of a similar type, that the level and rate of expenditure in the Glow litigation was very high. That was a deliberate poll strategy, wasn't it?
I didn't think so at the time.
Let's go to one last document, POL 406380. Can we go to bottom half of page 2, which is paragraph 4, please? And thank you very much. We're looking at for paragraph 4.3 in one moment. Now, this is a Bond Dickinson solicitor's document written requesting instructions on the strategy to be taken. So let's just look at this before I finish. Paragraph 4.3. Believe that the better solution is to try to focus the claimants into a collective position where they'll either have to abandon the claims or seek a reasonable settlement. It should be remembered that the claims that are financially supported by Freeths, whose fees are at least partially conditional on winning, a third-party funder and insurers. Without support, these proceedings would not have been possible. All three entities will have the power to pull their support if the merits of the case drop below a certain level. Our target's audience is therefore Freeths, the funder and insurers, who will adopt a cold, logical assessment of whether they'll get a payout rather than the claimants, who may wish to fight on principle regardless of merits. Now, this is Bond Dickinson solicitors asking for instructions to agree with a strategy which is to drive the Glow complainants away from the court because they will not be supported by Freeths, the insurers, or the third-party funders. That was the strategy that Mr. Fraser came to a conclusion that he could see in operation. Couldn't he, Mrs. van der Bogerd? That was the poll strategy, wasn't it?
So that wasn't my understanding when we started in the litigation, but clearly that's what was being proposed as we got into it.
You said in your evidence yesterday you're always aware of the public purse as being something at play in relation to the post office, Mrs. van der Bogerd. It's hardly the action of a company that's worried about the public purse, taxpayers' money, subpostmasters' mistresses' money through branch and through hard work being put into the post office. It's hardly expressing any concern, is it, about those worries, about the public purse, to use government money, postmasters' money to drive them out of the court. Is it, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
I was always concerned about taxpayers' money throughout the course of my time there. And as I said yesterday, one of the reasons I decided to leave when I did was because I was disillusioned, because there was more money being spent defending or trying not to pay out on the historical shortfall scheme than it was on paying out, and that was one of the reasons.
And every day that you were at the court, sitting there supporting the action, were you telling the legal team, oh, I'm a bit worried about the public purse and how much we're trying to drive these poor people into the ground? Was that your constant refrain, Mrs. van der Bogerd?
That wasn't the conversation. That was a conversation above me, not for me to have.
No further questions.
Thank you. I think that concludes the questioning, Mr. Beer.
It does, sir.
So, first of all, thank you to all the representatives of core participants who have so scrupulously abided by my directions. Thank you, Mrs. van der Bogerd, for making a detailed witness statement and for answering very many questions over 2 days. Right, Tuesday?
Tuesday at 9:45, please, sir.
Tuesday at 9:45. Thanks, everyone.